Good evening from New York. I am Selwyn Collins, your host of CWS Journeys. Welcome and thank you for joining us this evening. Today is the first day of the month of March that we are broadcasting, and it is a very important month, especially to those of us who embrace the empowerment of women and celebrate womanness. I have decided, in honor of Women's History Month and also the International Women's Day, which is March 8th, to invite only women to share their phenomenal stories and journeys and experiences with us this month. It is only appropriate and fitting that my sister, who fights very hard to empower women and children and advocate for their rights, Mrs. Anande Trotman-Joseph, is going to kick off this month. But before we get started, I would like to take an opportunity to acknowledge the phenomenal women in my life. It will be inappropriate and perhaps vulgar for me to acknowledge all the women who have made wonderful contributions to my life and helped to shape the person I have become today. So I will just restrict this to my mom, Mrs. Marjorie Collins, and my 6 sisters, Victorine, sorry about that, Joy, Megan, Jennifer, Carol, and Roxanne. I'll take a short break, and when I return, I will introduce you to Mrs. Anande Trotman-Joseph. We're back. I'm Selwyn Collins. Those of you who are now joining us, your host of CWS Journeys. The wonderful woman next to me is Mrs. Anande Trotman-Joseph. Anande, good evening and welcome to CWS again.
Good evening, Selwyn, and I am really very happy to join you and your viewers this evening.
Anande, this is going to be a conversation with a slight difference because you've been here before. And
Yes.
So there's no need to dive into your biography that much. But let's start with, who are you?
Well, before I start with saying who I am, I want to salute the women in your family. I've heard you recognize them, and I think that is really very admirable of you. And also to the women who are looking at this show and all of the men who support those women and who are also looking at the show. Now, who am I? I am an authentic woman. That's who I am. I am born in Guyana. I presently live in Grenada. But for me, I am a Caribbean woman. I am a global woman. That is what being me means to me.
Thank you. Thank you for that. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, that March 8th is International Women's Day, celebrated especially by the United Nations. Why is this such an important day to you, and do you believe to most women, or to women in general around the world?
It is very important to all of us, really, because being a woman in this generation, in this century, we have to know what empowerment means. And I say this because if we look back at the history of women, just a few centuries ago, in especially the Western world where we live, and still some parts of the world, women were treated not as equals, but in some cases as possessions, as chattels, as being equivalent to slaves, and just for the purposes of procreating to have the next generation come forward. So that is where we were. And once we know where we were and we know where we are by taking assessments of where womankind or womankind really are positioned at this time in our history, in the history of the world, well, then we must also know and plan, strategically plan for where we are going. And it is because of this that women, especially during the month of March, and again sometimes during the month of December, when we recognize and celebrate the human rights days and the 16 days of activism of women, that we remind ourselves as women what it is we have to do, what are our gains, what are our realities. So, this is what we're talking about. This is what we are reminding ourselves about during the month of March. This year as well is especially important for women's advocates, for women in the UN system, and women in the NGO networks and civil society throughout the world, because we are celebrating 20 years since the Beijing Declaration and the Beijing Platform for Women, which took place in Beijing, China. And many of our Caribbean women went there to China and stood with women throughout the world 20 years ago and pledged that the lot of women 20 years along would be a better one than it was in 1995. So this year is significant, and of course, not only are we assessing where women have reached in the last 20 years, but we are looking forward to where women will be in the next 20 years and beyond.
Since you have brought up a historical context, I would like to go back a little bit when we were actually teenagers, and
Yes,
we lived in Guyana, where there was a very assertive and progressive women's movement.
yes.
I can think of the WRSM today. There is the red thread, but having spoken about knowing where you were and where we were and where we are today, what sort of strides you have seen women have made from those times to now that resonate with you?
Well, the strides that women have made would have been to seize the opportunity for education, which I think was very important for me, so that today I can be a professional, and not only be a professional, but in turn be someone who, being educated, being conscious, because it's more than just your textbook education, being conscious of what it means to be a role model, to stand in the gap between women who are professionals and women who have not yet had opportunities due to their socioeconomic circumstances. For example, I would say education is very, very important. Not only education, as I said, going to school or seeking tertiary education in a university or some such institution, but the opportunities to understanding what it means for women to have individual self-esteem, collective self-esteem, and to have the collective will, what we call the collective, to have a critical mass of women taking their rightful places at the side of men in our society, to make sure that women are represented in a very balanced kind of way in our societies. So I have learned, and in a, through a series of processes, learned about all of this, what it is like to improve my own self-esteem, to be confident in myself as a woman and as a person, and to understand that whether I am male or female, I have a right to an equal place at the table of life, at the table of society, at the table of my profession. And this is what I believe women like me who have come of age have learned. And this is what I believe that women like me who have had the good fortune to have the opportunities to be supported by other women who went before me and would have passed the baton of life to me, of learning, of experience to me. That is where I think that we women, including myself, would have made great strides at this point in time. But
What is your favorite memory?
I'm unfortunate, sorry.
Sorry, what is your favorite memory of your mother and other women who have made an impact in your life?
Well, I must say that my favorite memory of my mother would be my mother singing to me. My mother loved music and playing a lot of music. And as a result of that, I became a singer, a semi-classical to classical singer, I like to say. I like a lot of Broadway music and classical music, semi-classical music. So that would be one really good memory I have of her. The second memory I have of her outside of our home, which was very fun-loving, was that I saw her as a role model, as a professional woman, a lawyer. And that is why I wanted to be a lawyer. My parents did not necessarily want me to be a lawyer. They wanted me to be a singer. My father suggested I be an economist, a sociologist, anything else but a lawyer. My mother was very happy for me to go on to sing, for example, which was a talent that I had developed, especially in my teenage years. But it was because I saw her going out to work. I knew that she represented people who were less fortunate in many cases, people in need of legal assistance. I heard her sit and discuss with her friends, many of whom, of course, were in those days leading lawyers, leading lady lawyers. And for example, my aunt Desiree Bernard, who went on to become not just a lawyer, but a judge, and then the Chief Justice of Guyana, the Chancellor of Guyana, and then the first female judge who sat on the Caribbean Court of Appeal. Those were the women who were my mother's friends. Pearline Roach, who passed away unfortunately um, when I had already become a lawyer, Elvie Edwards. Those were my role models. Those were the women who had gone ahead of, of me and who were my mother's friends. Hyacinth Eliezer, for example. There were Claudette LeBennett, Claudette Singh, so many of them who became lawyers and who became judges, who became politicians. Clarissa Reed, all of these lady lawyers very often came to our home and for different social functions, even professional functions. So those were my role models because of my mother's profession and because they were her friends. So those were the memories of her and of her friends. And of course, they always discussed law and how they can help, how they were able to do public, what we call now, what I know now to be public legal education, to be a part of different women's organizations, such as I believe it was called then CASWIG and CAFRA. And they didn't just stay in Guyana, they went out and became executive members of organizations, legal organizations such as OCBA, which
What
was the Organization for Caribbean Bar Associations. My Aunt Desiree went on to become one of the first presidents and definitely the first female president of that organization.
what does that mean to you? I have two questions that come to mind. One,
Yes.
did you find it strange that both of your parents who were attorneys and lawyers at the time not wanting you to pursue a career in law? And second part of the question is, well, let me let you answer that part, and then I would ask you the
Well,
rest.
I think one for my mother, she was very taken that she had a daughter who was talented and already on stage and loved what she did. And I think for her, she would not have minded if I pursued a singing career. So that was why she was not so intent on me becoming a lawyer. Also, I later met my deputy headmistress. I had first gone to St. Joseph's High School in Georgetown, Guyana, and the deputy headmistress, Sister Celine Marie, who had, I believe, come originally from Germany, and she was a sister of mercy. And she said to me when she discovered that I had become a lawyer that she was very, very surprised because she thought that I would have pursued either a career in the fine arts, obviously because I was a singer and I was a soloist in her glee club, the very famous glee club at the time of St. Joseph's High School, and all, or she thought I would become a medical doctor because I was her top biology student. So there it was, and then my father, on the other hand, I guess from time to time, lawyers are not always enamored with their own profession. It does have its own frustrations, and he thought that maybe for his daughter that perhaps she would maybe choose an easier profession, a less adversarial profession. Because at that time, when I was a teenager, I was not necessarily someone who was very aggressive. So I think that my both parents, seeing that I had these talents on stage, I was, a very top literature student, a top English student. I was doing very well in history. I was really one of the best students in my class at history. I think they saw me more as going into the fine arts
And,
or some such
and the
pursuit.
second part of my question, that
Yes,
second question that came to mind, is this orchard of mentors around you.
yes.
How how much do you believe that they have helped to guide you towards that particular career? And saying, having said that, or asked that, how important it is for young women to have mentors, good mentors.
I would say they were very, very important in one, my decision to become a lawyer because I admired them. They became my role models. And also, even when I became a lawyer, a young lawyer, there were times when I thought I had made a wrong turn in terms of my own profession. Because when you are a young person and you are looking at television, even when you're a law student, and you see Perry Mason, you see LA Law, and all of these great, and I remember too, there was this radio program about Portia Face's life, about a lawyer, and all of the lady lawyers, including my mother, would make sure that they listened to this particular radio sequel on a daily basis, every day, whenever it would come over, usually in the evenings. So I would say that yes, they became my role models, and even though it was not necessarily impressed upon me that I should become a lawyer, I wanted to be a lawyer. But like I said, when I did become a lawyer, and there were times when I thought maybe I should have really become a singer or done, taken up some other profession that more suited that side of me, the artistic side of me. I sang, I wrote poetry, I wrote short poems, I spoke on stage and so on. And these same women, older than I, they supported me. So they mentored me. They taught me that even in my own personal trials, through my own difficult times as a young adult, they were there for me. There were times when not just professionally, but in my personal life, I despaired. And it was these very women who would encourage me. I could pick up the phone as a young lawyer and call any one of them and ask them for assistance with respect to a particular area that was difficult for me to grasp. I remember I could call Pearline Roach and discuss with her anything about land law. I would call Elvie Edwards, who was a barrister, and ask her anything as well about any aspect of law and litigation. That was the kind of support. I remember too that as soon as I qualified as a lawyer, my Aunt Desiree, who of course was Justice Desiree Bernard at the time, she had formed the Guyana Association of Women Lawyers. So it was a done deal that as soon as I qualified, I would have joined this newly formed association. And that group of women were there for each other, the older for the younger, and for each other generally. And what was so unique about this particular association was that it was made up of lawyers who were in private practice, but also lawyers